Okay, welcome to the 70th episode of an Evolving Man podcast. Today, I'm really excited to be speaking to Alan Clements. Alan is a satirist, performing artist, former Buddhist monk, and investigative journalist in areas of war and extreme conflict. He is also the author of numerous books, a spoken word album, and the subject of a feature documentary film, Spiritually Incorrect. His latest book is Extinction Rated, an auto-fictional satire about good and evil. Welcome, Alan.
Nice to meet you, my friend. Honored
Yeah,
to be here.
yeah. Thank you so much for agreeing to come and speak on the podcast. And a big thanks to Shashi for introducing us.
What a divine woman she is.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you, my dear heart. I met her here in Ubud
Ah,
a number of years ago.
yeah.
She's only expanded in my heart. She's
Mm,
a beloved, truly, as you know.
yeah, really special lady. And yeah, it's lovely to reconnect. We first met in 2007, I think, at a workshop, and kind of kept in touch since then. So, beautiful. So, how I'd love for you to how I love to begin the podcast is around sharing some of your journey. I'd love for you to share some of your journey, how you got into the work you now do, your passions. Yeah.
Um, Thank you. What an honor to share a few minutes about the raison d'etre of my existence. I am a 60s child. I grew up in a military family. My mother's family from Boston, from Lebanon, from Syria. My father's side from Boston, Canada, and Ireland, up and down the east coast of the United States of America in military encampment, military installation until I was about 11 or 12. Went to the University of Virginia, wanted to be a lawyer, a diplomat, even had aspirations to be a president. It was founded by a US president, Thomas Jefferson. However, during that period, in short, the psychedelic, unexpected psychedelic interruption came deep into my heart and validated all the ways in which I was feeling completely out of step with culture, society, politics. Everything became revealed to me that I was not going insane by feeling the way that I was feeling. As a result, I quit college, took up art full time. My partner and I eventually went to India, not so much to get enlightened, but a great place to ask the questions. Spent a couple of years, and through the serendipity of things, meditation became an active element of my journey. I wanted to discover what I didn't know about myself. That was the essence of it. And as much as I appreciated the psychedelic experience of awe and wonderment and revelation, I wanted to understand why I felt so uncomfortable being embodied in a context of war and genocide and extinctions and death and love and pain and duality. That existential angst turned into an unstoppable, well, I would say a voice that could not be avoided. And so meditation became the operative metaphor. And so my studies led me to one person who spoke the language of my own journey, which was the Venerable Mahasi Sayadaw of Burma, who turned out to be one of the earliest grandfathers of the mindfulness meditation movement, who simply empowered, as I understood it, take a look at your own mind and observe the phenomenology of consciousness to discover that which you don't know about yourself. Just simply look, see, feel, and know for yourself without embellishment. Okay, in the simple sense, halfway through. That took us to Burma, 1976, 1977. And I met him and asked to ordain as a Buddhist monk simply because I wanted to meditate under his guidance and to learn what it meant to just observe consciousness without an endpoint. And he said, we live under dictatorship here. You can't stay for more than 6 days. And he recommended that I go to a monastery in Sri Lanka with a student of his, where I eventually did end up and practiced for some time. Eventually went to Los Angeles and felt still I wanted to be with this great master of mindfulness and invited him to America. And he came. And he taught 2 retreats that I organized in America in 1979. And during that period, I felt so inspired by the Buddha's 4 noble truths: the truth of suffering, the cause of that suffering, the release of that suffering, and the journey and the path to awaken from that self-inflicted conflict. And there was nothing that could speak to me more intimately than those truths. And Mahasi Sayadaw embodied a reverential relationship to that journey. He called it the Dhamma, Dhamma. You know the word.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked him, I want to ordain here and now. And he said, that's fine. I ordained in New York in 1979 as a Buddhist monk with him. Flew off the next day to Burma with a 1-week visa. And on the 7th day, the dictatorship granted me an extension for the first time, a non-diplomat in many years. And I stayed at the Mahasi Satanayekta in Rangoon, Burma, as a 29-year-old ordained monk for one purpose: to look at consciousness, to understand how I am contributing to this sense of disquietude that the Buddha used the word dukkha. Dukkha, the pain of separation, the pain of change, the pain of all the things that you and I and everyone in the world right now simultaneously can feel and see and hear and read and touch: genocide, war, rape, birth, death, aging, galaxies colliding. Everything was a cacophony of this dukkha. I could not escape this sense of suffering. And even just the idea of one woman on earth being raped was one too many for me. Mm-hmm. And it played so deeply into my own psyche, my own subconscious. And so he said, look at your own mind and begin to study the nature of consciousness. And that was the journey. Mm-hmm. And I stayed in Burma off and on, being thrown out 3-4 times over the years to come by the dictator. And here it is in 2023, mm-hmm. after I was thrown out 3 or 4 times. In 1983, I came here to Bali, thrown out as a Buddhist monk. First time I came here as a monk. And I could not get enough of this meditative experience of Satipatthana, Vipassana, Bhavana, which is as you know, the deep felt introspection of saturating the human consciousness with present time awareness, and to feel, have the courage to feel, Mahasi said, feel the nature of phenomenology as it arises in your own mind, at your ear, at your eye, in your mind, in your body, your sensation. Notice these conditioned phenomena. And what do you learn from watching that? And so here it is. I'm 72 now. I ordained at 29. And I am dedicated as deeply and humbly as I can possibly be in my broken, whole, flawed human incarnation to be a young student of the Dhamma, of the Buddha, of the Sangha, the community, trying to aspire day to day to live in the most radiant, intimate, humble beauty of making the best I can be of the human mind and overcoming my own self-generated dukkha, suffering. So my whole journey has been primarily being a son of the Buddha in a very deliberate and intentional way. I just can't get enough of the power of mindfulness.
Thank you. What a beautiful story. Really beautiful. And it's almost as you're speaking, I can resonate with different stories I've heard of, and I'm wondering the person you went to in Sri Lanka, whether that was Anagarika. I've forgotten his surname. I know that Mahesi Sayadaw, he had Deepa Ma, because I've read Deepa Ma's work, and I'm like, oh, she was a student of Mahesi Sayadaw. So I'm just thinking, oh, I'm sure I've read about different accounts of people. So
Yeah, there was a monastery called Kandabodha just outside of Rangoon that I went to for a few months. But I also lived in Sri Lanka when I was thrown out once by the dictator at Polgastua, which was the island hermitage. I lived there for nearly a year in 1981. Very extraordinary experience to be on a 5-acre island without electricity or running water, barefoot, no conversation, and to embed, if you will, within virgin jungle and to contemplate the nature of context inside and outside. I mean, I don't know whether you've ever lived, or perhaps you have, you've been a forest monk. But to those who live in forests, realize that you are part of the food chain. You know, everything is eating everything all the time, and no exceptions, including you.
Yeah.
And so you see the first noble truth of the Buddha's teaching, you know, the truth of dukkha, you know, you can't even stop moving outside during the day because there's so many mosquitoes and flies and malaria and typhoid. You're just constantly moving. And if you sleep at night, you're often woken up by a rat eating your leg or your arm, or you're biting you, and centipedes and monkeys, and everything's wanting to eat everything, you know. And I found a type of sickening bliss in it all because it was so straight up. It was like the ultimate Dhamma scotch. There was no ambiguity. This is truth in your face, unvarnished existence. You know, there's no place that you can be stable in this circumstance and trust that it's incredibly safe. And so you had to constantly watch your mind nanosecond by nanosecond by nanosecond. And I had never found such bliss within the Buddha's teaching before in my life. And I would call it enchanted and aggravated my quest to become as awake as humanly possible. Then my teacher called me back from Burma. I saw him in my mind's eye as vividly as I see you on my flat screen. And I left the next day and went to Bangladesh, got a 6-day visa, went back to Burma as a monk. And they extended my visa, and I went back into intensive meditation practice under Mahasi Sayadaw's guidance at that point.
Beautiful. Yeah, I can resonate. I mean, I was living in the UK as a novice monk, so I didn't have all of the externals which I heard so much about, you know, in the northeast of Thailand, the jungles then. And I think mine was more an internal struggle. I really, really struggled because the silence and the peace brought up my internal trauma, which was really It was very difficult. My time as a monk, more from an internal, the early childhood stuff coming forward. So, as we
I
shared.
was, wow. Yeah, I've seen what I imagine you to be describing,
Mhm.
having sat in on many intensive meditative interviews with many of the teachers in Rangoon and over the many decades, and listened and observed and felt the upsurge of historical configurations of complexity from mild trauma to middle trauma to acute trauma. I've met monks and nuns who've actually unearthed murders in this lifetime that they buried through denial and disassociation, rape, beheadings, executions. Of course, South Asia is fraught with genocides and wars and civil wars, Burma especially. My first book was Burma, the Next Killing Fields in 1990, endorsed by the Dalai Lama. So the blood is soaked, the earth is soaked in carnage. This trauma is a very interesting thing, the intrinsic trauma of the First Noble Truth, but also childhood trauma, middle-age trauma, present time trauma, the trauma of denial, the trauma of collusion, the simultaneity of collusion right now going on, the Holocaust that we're embedded in simultaneously in this universe. For me personally, I was trained to do everything, young monk, to learn the fine Dhamma art as I was trained, because I was trained as a young artist as well, and they brought up art a lot. The Dhamma art of a focused mind. Focus on the phenomena that's most present. Concentrate your mind moment to moment. And I took that so seriously that I was able to keep a lot of the so-called historical traumas in my own life. And I don't mean this in a negative way. I mean, the entire teaching, as I felt it and have discovered it, is there's no limit to the historical traumas of our existence. And I hit a telephone pole when I was 15 years old, going high speed, driving a car, went through the windshield, had undiagnosed severe brain trauma from the age of 16, and multiple other forms of trauma. But concentration and meditation and mindfulness together with the inspiration to focus the mind brought me into a radiant, joyful, present time presence, a life affirming type of, not sexual, but an eroticism of the adventure of Dhamma to awaken to the highest fidelity of the most beautiful states of mind and the development of the progressive insight towards Nibbana. That was the teachings that I received. And they opened every aspect of my entirety with awe and wonderment and respect. So that's another way. Yeah, that's the way that I dealt with my trauma. Left it behind.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I really got into art as a way of processing my trauma while I was in the monastery. I started to paint, found the meditation. I started to think I was going insane. So, I was advised not to meditate so much and just be mindful, do exercise, be in the community. I worked with my dreams quite a lot as well. I'm a Jungian analyst. I found that I struggled to connect to my emotions, and I started to work on my dreams. That's when the tears came. That was very cathartic, but it was for me a very dark time. I self-harmed. I tried to commit suicide while I was in the
As a
monastery.
monk.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah. And I think, I've just been running from life, very living in the city, in London, financial sector,
mm,
and then coming there, it was like, oh, it felt like safe
mm.
and I could let go. And so, yeah. Yeah. And within
I
that,
had, wow, wow, wow. What a journey you've been on. What a journey.
mm, mm,
What a journey.
yeah, yeah. I was speaking to the abbot a couple of weeks ago, and he was sharing that he knew other monks who were struggling in a similar way to me currently, who've had to disrobe because of that. Um, so, I really honor you for being able to do what you did and transmute that trauma. It's a really beautiful story. Thank you, Alan.
But that's it's such a complex area of discussion.
Mm,
Uh, you know, I, Sir Isaac Newton, for example, I don't know when it was. We all know that he took that prism
mm,
and put it in front of a little hole through the curtain with the light,
mm,
brought that rainbow on the wall, and everyone present was blown away.
mm, mm,
I bring it up as the spectrum of dukkha, the spectrum of suffering, the spectrum of disquietude. It's infinite. And how each of us go about processing, engaging, learning from. I want to use the word history and context simultaneously. As you know, as I know, just quoting things that I've read, there is no beginning to the beginning of time, no beginning to life, no beginning to conditions, no beginning to human existence. And that beginningless nature of existence and life really brought me into a very intimate relationship to personally trying to do all I possibly could to learn how to focus the mind through the mindful satipatthana vipassana training
mm,
with joyful engagement. Because I had a teacher that I absolutely adored.
mm, mm,
He was the first human being in my life that looked at me and said, "You are not insane. You are incredible.
mm,
You're intense. You are mad. You have incredible focus. There is no beginning to your struggle and your madness and your trauma and your insanity. There is a way, though, to deal with it right here and now." And I said, I've had enough money. I've had enough sex. I've masturbated enough. I've drunk. I've done opioids. I've done cocaine. I've done 150 acid trips, I told him. I explained to him what the psychedelic had done to me. I have done, I have done, I have done. I have achieved my dream. I have painted all throughout the night on acid. I have loved the woman of my dreams. There's nothing left in the world for me except to know Nibbana. I said, I want to know the enlightened state.
mm, mm,
And call me an idealist, call me a dreamer, call me completely a madman who had been psychedelicized. I did no longer want to come down from consciousness. And he took me under his wing and said, "You follow these instructions and you will find a fine level of joy and rapture and insight and wisdom and calm and equipoise and an identity that you could never even imagine is possible
mm,
if you just follow these instructions ever so carefully with your tears, your pain, your anguish, And let me tell you, just like you, Piers, I could have killed during those months of silence and intensive practice. And he had the elasticity, the nimbleness, and the skill to keep me encouraging, to keep holding space for myself. I did not give up. I did lots of things that one would consider aberrant to intensive meditation, smoking opium, going in the middle of the night to areas of the monastery where the workers lived and they were sleeping to find butts, because in Burma they put opium in the cigarettes and in the cigars just to quiet the anguish. On and on and on. But I stayed with it and I found a radiance that gave me insight into. I feel I listened carefully and did the best that I could do with the teachings that were given to me. And I have no advice for anyone with regard to trauma. I would never recommend anyone to follow my footsteps on my journey. I don't recommend people even meditate. I don't recommend people to do psychedelics. I've done years and years of psychedelic assisted MDMA therapy, LSD psychedelic therapy, ketamine therapy. I've been in and out of psychiatry with psychologists and therapists, sex workers. There's nothing much that I haven't done to explore the dimensionality of the complexity of desire and fear and trauma and denial and deception. And find your footing wherever you go and just keep alive. The courage to keep alive the adventure. That's been my deal. There isn't a right or wrong way ultimately. So
beautiful. Yeah.
I've just been blessed, but I would never, ever, and I don't recommend anyone to follow anything that I've ever done.
What do you teach now when you are
Nothing.
Nothing.
I do not teach. I have no students. I actually am very disturbed by the word teaching and teacher. I'm much more from the place of just natural sapio eroticized Ubuntu, South African term. I cannot be who I am without you. And so the naturalness of me being in refined formation with you allows me the uniqueness of my Dharma artistry and the discovery of a new dimension of my own awakening. I don't believe in teachings. I believe in the organic interface of wherever you live, just be the best version of yourself and discover and learn. And that's been my journey for the last 10 years. I've just really abandoned all notions of thinking that Alan has something to teach someone. I'd rather reveal how I've learned from my own denial, my own deception, my own contradictions, my own addictions, my own tears, how I've protected my darkest secrets. What are those secrets and why have I thought of them as vaults that should be hidden? How do I masquerade and Botox my shame? I don't mind talking in a self-therapeutic openness about the edges of my own self-discovery, but I would really recommend not to follow anything that I'm saying as something that you should follow. This is just how I've discovered and am discovering the incredible insanity of being a human being in a world of madness.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, Alan. Very inspiring. Reminds me of some of the teachings of Ajahn Chah that monks would often ordain in the 70s, 80s in Thailand, and especially coming up from Bangkok. And he would say to them, close your books, because they'd bring their books they wanted to read, and he'd lock them away. He'd say, no, I want you to study your own heart. That's what I want you to study.
You know, my teacher is my fingerprint. No two of us still do it alike. There are four noble truths, but my teacher is my fingerprint. No two of us will do the four noble truths alike. Snowflakes forming and dissolving. No two of us will do it alike. No two of us will hold hands alike. No two of us will cry alike. No two of us will kiss alike. No two of us will make love alike. No two of us will breathe alike. Yet there's four noble truths. So we got to take the ism out of uniqueness. And that's a very psychedelic dance of radical intimacy with yourself, being willing to come out of the conformity and the collusion with ego and pride and pretense and all these various ways that we camouflage the best kept secret of all, how I lie to myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, what am I upholding and why? And so I think the best teachings that we can share with each other is how I'm learning to discover myself at the edge of my own intimate self-awakening. I would call it self-therapy, not teacher. Let me reveal to you the evidence of my own topography at the confluence of my own unpeeling, my own revealing, my own sapio-erotic intimacy. I think that's going to be the new paradigm of the future, is self-therapeutic, unassisted Dhamma awakening. And microdosing at the edge of your own vulnerability, the empowered vulnerability of your own courageous, life-affirming, erotic adventure. No one can be your teacher except you. And I think the more that we can learn to teach ourselves, or we overcome power imbalances, predation, fear, shame, belittlement, pleasing, unassisted self-therapy. The Buddha, as you know, and I don't know that we could even do justice to the word Kalyanamitta. The Buddha used that apparently to describe the role of the sacred ally, the sacred friend, the true teacher. He said it to his friend, as you know, the often quoted sutta to Ananda. No, Ananda, it's not just half the Dhamma life, noble friendship. It's the totality of being. We cannot be who we want to be without each other. But that otherness has to be radically committed to satya, to truth, patience, khanti, karuna, compassion, radical empathy, resonant feeling, crying together, holding, feeding. You're a monk. We could not live without each other. We could not live without lay people giving us, supporting us, giving us medicines, holding our hands when we were crying. I've almost died 4 or 5 times as a monk. I could not be alive without others. Now that everyone in my life, all those teachers, all those mentors, all my male best friends, why? They're all dead now. But the word Kalyanamitta, I've seen over the last 7, 8, 10, 2 years, Alan, inhabit that inside of yourself. Become your own Dhamma teacher. Become your own psychedelic assisted self-therapeutic savant. Become your best lover. Become your best giver. talk to yourself like a psychiatrist, a therapist, a best friend, self-compassion, self-loving kindness, self-saturated, mindful, present, intimate vulnerability. Learning that art is the new paradigm of the Dhamma today, I think. Take it off of other. Take down the need for students and teachers.
Yeah.
Teach by revealing how you're learning, not what you think I need to know.
That's really beautiful. Someone pointed out that in our modern education system, we call it teaching, but it's more like forcing information in, whereas the word education comes from Latin educe, which means to draw out. You're not pushing anything in, but that's what our modern education is. So it's interesting how that has flowed into our spiritual teachings. We're trying to give something rather than draw out.
I'm so there with you. It's a word that's very operative in my own spirit, mind, existential body, called reverential. It's a little bit different than sacred. But one of the reasons, backing up, that drew me to the late Venerable Mahasi Sayadaw and his successor U Pandita was that meditation wasn't confined to a specific posture. So we challenged all forms of what I call postural apartheid. Meditation was a state of being in consciousness, not a posture with the eyes closed. And they really emphasized that training, practice, teaching as a way of living in a reverential, sacred, dignified, mindfully saturated, present time presence with the phenomena that's arising inside and outside at the confluence of the sense doors. See it truthfully, feel it honestly, honest feeling, and knowing that truthfully, the Dhamma will reveal itself as to the nature of what's occurring. It's changing, it's conditioned. You cannot find an unchanging self-reference to changing phenomenology, anatta, as you know.
Yeah, non-self.
And because you can't control it, and it's arising independent of a will, dukkha. And you went, oh my God, I cannot shut consciousness off. I cannot shut Vedana off, feeling, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. I cannot shut color and sound, thoughts, images, the substratum, this totality, this samsara, this consciousness, this vijnana everywhere, always arising by conditioned presence, cannot be turned off by your will. U Agasara, my monk's name. That's called anatta in Dhamma language, they would say.
Really? Okay.
And they go, oh my God. I said, wow, how reverential. All places, all times, all postures, all contexts, all degrees of complexity. Practice Dhamma in that way. There is no sitting meditation, walking meditation, eating meditation alone. As a monk, as a bhikkhuni, as a nun, as a laywoman, as a layman, we inhabit now time presence mindfully with the factors of awakening, overcome postural apartheid. That was the nature of the Mahasi system and the teachings of the Buddha at the Mahasi Satana Yekta in Rangoon. And so whatever we did, inhabit it. And that was like, it blew me away that they took away my belief in meditation. It was like, wow, there is no need to hurry up and get through the meal in order to get back to the meditation hall to meditate. They said, take the speed out of everything. Slow down, and feel. Look, see, feel, saturate that feeling with mindfulness, discern what the feeling is, and know it. Know the sensation, the somatic nature of knowing the sensation as it arises. It's fear, Agathara. Know it as fear. And I would begin to cry with joy, knowing that I'm knowing fear without the need to change it or pin an origin to it or project that it's going to continue and devour me. Cry and cry and cry, Agathara. It's free-flowing tears here in the Yekta, the monastery. Just keep knowing it with the purity of sati, mindful, and satya, truthfulness, the truthfulness of a saturated presence, feeling what you feel. That was my teacher's gifts to me. And that's all time, all posture, all states, all degrees of complexity teachings that I learned that were called the Satipatthana Vipassana Bhavana, the teachings of insight and mindfulness, as it was taught to me by my teachers, Mahasi Sayadaw and his successor, Sayadaw U Pandita. I'm just a very humble, at times, often arrogant, former drug addict, brash artist, young son of the Dhamma teachings of the Buddha. Nothing special. But I've been gifted by beloved teachers, women and men, and I think I listened well. And I do what I can, what I call, I have a little simple equation here, and I pause here. It's called I, like the letter I equals N T W. I equals N means now, T time, W wisdom. Inhabit, now, time, wisdom. That's my be here now mantra. That's the next iteration of what meditation means to me as I've learned it. Inhabit, now, time, wisdom. And wisdom, as you know, in the Buddhist Pali word is panya. And that's so magnificent, as you know from your direct experience, the ability to abide wisely in the phenomenology of seeing conditions clearly. They arise out of conditions. They're impermanent, anicca. They're empty of centrality, anatta. Hold on to any condition, there's dukkha. And to see that wisely as a felt deeper than somatic in terms of what the word means, but an existentially somatic, mindfully suffused presence, wisdom, lives in intimate connectivity and release simultaneously. When? Now. Where? The six sense doors. What do I observe and feel? What's most predominant? In the absence of the most predominant, inhabit your body, Uagasara. Feel the sensations of being was the most common instruction that I received. Inhabit the sensations of being and let the breath breathe on its own. in breath, out breath. Don't race it. Don't look for it. Don't hope for it. Don't fear it. Let the breathing come to you. And that was meditation to me.
Mm.
That was
Mm.
the teachings that I received.
Thank you. It's really beautiful. I can resonate with so much of it. And as you're speaking, you know, my work is a lot around trauma, and listening to a lot of the latest, you know, Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote the book The Body Keeps the Score, is a leading psychiatrist. I was doing some studying with him a few months ago, and he was saying about bringing mindfulness in. It's really great for healing trauma, becoming more present of the body, because what happens in trauma is we disappear up into the head. We've dissociated. A lot of the people I work with have dissociated. And I'm finding in my work and hearing them speak is what you're just sharing is become mindful. What are you feeling? What can you hear? What can you smell? What can you taste? That these things help us to, you know, again, they're talking about this window of tolerance with trauma. A lot of us, it's very narrow, and I'm hearing you speak. It reminds me of that as we're more mindful of these uncomfortable feelings on the periphery, this window opens and it opens, and we can become embodied fully, you know, feeling connected and contented people again. So
it's very interesting too. It's a very interesting, fascinating discussion that you're bringing up, and I'm interpreting through my own subjectivity and my listening.
mm-hmm.
One of the treacheries of the existential treacheries of embodied presence
Mm-hmm.
is that you are psychedelicizing by cognitive function. The practice of meditation is, at least, you're inhabiting progressive depths and dimensions of infinity. The body doesn't stop where the skin keeps it wrapped. And memory goes beyond whatever memory that we think we're boxed into. My experience with meditation is that the more mindfulness, which functions to see that which is there, you become telescopic, you become psychedelic telescopic, you become psychic, intuitive, intimately telescopic, intimately awakened. You begin to feel so many things and see so many things. I would have many images of myself screaming and traumatized on the operating table, going through the windshield, hitting that telephone pole. The memory of thinking I was the ugliest human being on earth, bandaged for nearly a year afterwards, with unthinkable migraine headaches, and all of a sudden, the deeper I got into the imaging of that, and I was encouraged to get back more and more into the sensations of letting the breathing breathe on its own and feel, sit, walk, occupy, live, cry, feel, be present. The next thing you know, I found myself in a radiant field of heightened piti or joy. And then it went into rapture. And all of a sudden, all those images of tears and screaming disappeared completely. And I felt like I was reborn into a completely new mind-body presence based upon the development of different states of consciousness through the application of mindfulness. But it was the training of learning how to occupy what you referred to as felt somatic sensations. But the more that I felt, the more psychically I evolved, it turned out. Next thing you know, I'm telling my teacher, I'm talking to deities in my room, and the room is completely lit up as if there's a lamp. So that's very common at this stage of practice, Uagathara.
Yeah, yeah.
If you get too identified with the phenomenology of these incredibly alluring, devas and dakinis, you will deteriorate and come right back into the horror of your car accident. And sure enough, I would go back a week later and I would be crying to him. It's like I'm being overcome by the trauma of this and that and the struggle of this and that. I said, I warned you to be more and more mindful, even of joy, of rapture, of light. And you could call it the trauma of radiance, the trauma of denial, the trauma of intrinsic connectivity to the phenomenology of infinity.
Mm-hmm.
And then the tears of just, I could not stop anicca. That's really traumatic to see that you cannot just step out of the incarceration of consciousness. And then I began to see that being a prisoner of consciousness was intrinsic to being embodied with a mind. So lots of levels to this dukkha, the Buddha's first noble truth. And more to the point is I was encouraged by my teachers, and I'll just keep this short. Mahasi Sayadaw's monk's name was Sobhana, which means beautiful states of mind. And you may know, but the word meditation in the Pali language is known as bhavana. And beyond the normal translation of it being mind training, the way that I learned from Mahasi Sayadaw and also Sayadaw U Pandita was that it should be understood as the beautification of consciousness. And they trained us, me, in seeing consciousness like a flower. Invest in that which nurtures its opening, not to examine the darkness between the petals. It's very tempting to try to do that, but no matter how much cognitive, intuitive, existential, felt analysis of source projection, darkness, pain, evil, hurt, harm, inadequacy, there'll never be resolution from that to open consciousness and to flower the radiance of beautiful states of mind. It may feel like it, but be very careful of translating that feeling to be a positive feeling in the longer term. That's a very, very difficult, complex, intimate conversation. And so I was trained as meditation along with this all posture, all time. Learn to occupy, learn to place mindful identity within beautiful states of mind. Learn how to step out of negative states of mind as they occur, whether they be in thought, speech, and action, or whether they be during speech, thought, and action, after you reflect. Was that a negative thought? Was that a negative speech? Was that a negative action? Cease doing that. Or if you feel the impulsion to do something that's negative, try to feel that impulsion and abandon it. And then step into beauty. What is beauty? I was encouraged to write down in my notebook, what are the beautiful states of mind that you want to develop in your meditative practice? And I encourage people to do this all the time. I want to develop joy. I want to develop kindness. I want to develop, well, I think I want to develop compassion, but not a whole lot of it because it takes me out of myself. It takes me out of my ego. And I want to develop authenticity. And I want to develop especially patience. I'd like to be more generous, dana. And I really have a tremendous love with panya, wisdom. But most of all, I want to develop freedom. They would say to me, freedom is the oxygen of civilized existence. learn how to breathe it, inhabit it, protect it, elevate it, co-create from it, support it in others and in yourself. And so putting these beautiful states of colors on the palette of your own interior is the practice of Dhamma. It's not Buddhism. It's not meditation. It's not sitting quietly watching the mind. It's not bare attention. It's the beautification of being in context with self and in context with others. That's that Kalyanamitta, how to become your own best friend, is really synonymous with becoming a radically creative Dhamma, Dharma artist.
Mm.
And I think artistry is a far more compelling way for a lot of people to play the transformational awakening game than healing or wounding and psychiatry and psychology and spirituality, God forbid spirituality. But Dharma artistry, Dhamma artistry, the vocation and the aesthetics of your own personal unique application of how you want to beautify your own interiority in context with others. And the last point I want to make here is when I look in my heart and I'm honest, what's missing, if there's anything missing, is of course there's things missing. Any one of us, all of us want to be met, loved, touched, adored, listened to, creatively elevated, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't hurt to really find a significant one or two or three or a sangha of people that, look, I just love your intensity, your beauty, and I want to practice mudita with you. Don't hurry up through your joy. Take your time. I want to learn more and more what turns you on, what makes you happy. And so, how to bring that sense of seeing to yourself so that we don't have to wait until next Wednesday or two to see our therapist. We've got all those 24-hour blocks in between to be the best friend you could imagine being. That training right there, I'm all down in. And make it cost-free as much as possible. Microdose, meditate, mindfully, intelligently elevate. Let's give back to people the gift of the Kalyanamitta, how to become your own best Dhamma teacher.
Thank you. Wow. So many things I can resonate with and so many great teachings there. The Kalyanamitta reminds me of the going back to the monastery a few weeks ago, the Sangha, as having those spiritual friends there. I think the abbot used to often speak about that. And as you were sharing earlier, I remember going to the abbot once when I was in my 20s and I'd had this blissful experience. I'm like, oh my God, this has just happened. I've just seen the nature of existence. And he was like, so, what are we doing for lunch? And I'm like, what do you mean, so? He's blah, blah, blah. And he's like, no, let go. And sure enough, a few days later, it was like, into the dark space. And I'm like, oh, I should have listened, not got too attached to the blissful state. And so I can resonate with it.
Obviously we're beings that are intimately alive because of each other.
Mm-hmm.
When I bring up the word Kalyanamitta and becoming and evolving the Dharma artistry of self-intimacy, self-compassion, self-oriented love, the attributes of that evolution is that you become more radiant, right? Mm-hmm. And inevitably, when you're feeling better, you want to not imagine loving someone. You just want to shower them with the radiance of a more unconditional love, because that's what you're learning about yourself, is to embrace conditions more openly. And so it translates in a way that's, wow, that's pretty rad. Thank you for letting me just look at you and just say, you are beautiful, my friend. I love your vulnerability. I love the little exchanges that we have here, never having met before across 10,000 miles of ocean and air. And what a rare moment in existence to see a little quiet firefly radiating beautiful Dhamma light from wherever you are, my friend. May we be Sangha in future Sanghas, in present Sanghas. May we attain the highest states of awakening together. And may all beings liberate from this fear, from greed, from confusion. May we find a safer environment where there is no trauma to overcome. Mm. That's another very key point for me. It's like I'm so out of the box. I'm a trans Buddhist, by the way.
Trans Buddhist, okay.
Trans Buddhist, because Buddhism apparently works because of the context being defined by anicca, anatta, and dukkha. Mm-hmm. But that's a very limited imagination. There's got to be places in totality. Just do a little bit of a microdose or a higher dose, and you'll realize, oh, wow, maybe there's places that defy the physics of this world. Mm-hmm. Like not a black hole, but a white hole, mm-hmm. which Michio Kaku, the great physicist, talks about, like goes into a whole other trans hyperdimension where there is no anicca, anatta, and dukkha. There is no Four Noble Truths. There's a fifth noble truth. And it's not attributed to the Buddha. It's attributed to a whole new dimension of trans consciousness where there is no suffering to overcome. Now we're in the radical imagination phase of existence called playing with psychedelic-induced awe. That's another whole area of existence that I feel is just becoming more and more radiant. This is where I use the word erotic, not to be sexual. It can be that, obviously, but I've used it for decades. Eroticized Ubuntu, eroticized mysticism, eroticized Dhamma is the adventure. When people look at the Buddha, they ask, what was his motivation? Apparently, it was twofold. One, I have compassion. I want to learn all you can learn about consciousness to help people overcome suffering. But also the second motivation, it could have been the first motivation, was nothing other than the adventure of consciousness. The psychedelic, the psychonaut. I want to understand what's possible with consciousness. That's pretty life-affirming. That's very erotic to me. Mm-hmm. That life-affirming adventure is so underplayed in life. Toxic culture, bad parenting, war, genocide, rape, pillage, all of which are there. But whoa, I've been gifted with this radical, crazy maverick caterpillar that chose to climb the tree and do acid within his chrysalis and said, fuck my wings. I don't even want them. I'm doing acid. You know, and I think that we need to break the box of imagination wide open so that each of us become savants, poets, spoken word artists, crazy existential actresses on the bow of a Titanic that will never sink because you refuse to participate in playing small and playing with fear. There's got to be dimensions of existence where we can break the coma of the physics that we're embedded in, even the teachings of the Buddha. And to me, that's where eroticism comes in as a way to overcome the belief in victim. Something wasn't done well enough for me. Well, eroticize your mind. Okay, that's just, again, I don't teach anything, but this is how I relate to myself. Yes, you motherfucker, that sucks. I've seen people's heads blown off in war. It sucks. You just want to fucking shoot them. And we live in this embedded madness. And I'm going to not basically just say, it hurts so fucking bad. I've got to heal from it. Fuck you, God. It's a bad design. I'm going to continue to eroticize, life affirm, and break out of this fucking space called conformity to religion, conformity to psychological standards of healing and prognosis and diagnosis of systemic family systems, of inability of what mom and dad did. Okay, I'm not going to blame all that.
Mm-hmm.
It's an approach. But flowers open by nurturing light, minerals, oil, water, soil, not by examining that darkness. Light a candle, dude.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's what I've gotten from refugee camps. That's what I've gotten from war zones. That's what I got from areas of genocide. That's what I've gotten from political prisoner. I did 4 books with my colleague Fergus Harlow called Burma's Voices of Freedom. Spent 10 years in and out of Burma after I was unblacklisted by the dictator, after 17 years of being public enemy #1 there, from my work with the Aung San Suu Kyi in Burma's revolution. And I interviewed close to 500 former political prisoners because I wanted to know as much as I humanly could know from the outside of what it took to survive incarceration and torture and rape. What was your Dhamma there? What was your Buddhism there? What was your Hinduism there? How did you bring Allah there? Where was your atheism there? And I learned a lot in those books. The most abiding teaching was never fucking give up. Mm-hmm. Those bars do not incarcerate me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting.
They cannot take my dignity unless I give it to them. My freedom is not theirs to take. These were abiding messages that I cannot not inhabit as the oxygen of my being today, because they're the abiding ontologies that give me the sense of my loyalty to what I call sila, or integrity. Mm-hmm. These are sacred horrors, but it's a sacred duty to bring the voices of these prisoners of conscience to the history of the future. They're the teachers, not the teachers who are teaching alone. So a little bit of a rant, but I think it's beautiful. Never give up.
Yeah, and I used to have, I found the Dalai Lama's words, and I think I might have had it on my shrine when I was a novice monk, which was never give up, no matter what's going on, never give up. And these were the words of the Dalai Lama, and it was like, yeah, I really see that, and it reminds me of Viktor Frankl as well.
That's right.
Him saying realizing that if his time in Auschwitz, nobody could make him think anything that he didn't want to think.
Beautiful. So. I picked up those phrases from my very dear friend Robert Chardoff, who was the producer of all the Rocky movies.
Okay, yeah.
And I married he and his wife Jennifer back in 1990. Brought him to Burma, brought him to India, started a philanthropic school in Bodh Gaya, the place of the Buddha's enlightenment, the Jennifer School. Anyway, he made an archetype out of the Rocky story, which was essentially, no matter how hard they hit, don't defeat yourself, never give up. It seems to have gone ubiquitous as a meme. But for me personally, he encouraged me over and over again and loved me from my core down through my madness, to keep that level of moral courage, which was his foundational integrity. And I say it's the soul of dignity, moral courage. Learn how you lie to yourself and take joy in revealing that to yourself. We're all flawed.
Yeah.
We're all broken. don't fold over it and be, you know, an obvious imposter.
I love what you say there about the fifth noble truth, the victim. I kind of some of the podcasts I've done are with the authors who've done King, Warrior, Magician, Lover about the archetypes. And I see almost like this is our next stage in the evolution of humanity is we've got to move from victim to creator to our vision for what we do want to see unfold here and really stick by it. You know, if we get knocked down, it's no, come back to the vision, seeing that this is going to happen. That's my belief that things can change. I really believe that. I know that.
I'm right with you. You know, there was one gentleman, a former prisoner of conscience in Burma. His name was U Win Tin. He was Burma's most renowned journalist and one of the founders of the NLD, the National League for Democracy, which was the Democratic Party that eventually went on to win the elections and was also founded with Aung San Suu Kyi, the Nobel laureate, who I was blessed to have done a book with called The Voice of Hope that she titled Book of Conversations, and a gentleman named U Tin U, who was the former general under the dictator, one of my best friends. Anyway, the point being is U Win Tin spent 21 years in solitary in prison in Burma. No bed, no pot, no pillow, broken teeth, and spent a considerable amount of time, he told me in our 5 interviews that we did in succession after he was released, of taking pieces of brick that he could get off the wall with his finger and spent months writing freedom on the wall as never giving up. And although they enticed him to want to leave and sign documents to give up politics, he refused. Never seen anyone for 21 years, no bed, no pillow, no mosquito net, no medicines, no toothbrush. How do you get through the darkest times? You never give up, he said. Even when he left and was so-called released, he refused to take off his prison uniform. Why? I asked him. He said, because there's still prisoners of conscience in the prison. Until they're all released, I'm not free. Never give up. Gave away all of his contracts, all of his books, all of his money, lived in an open air small room on a busy thoroughfare where I interviewed him. It's on film too, by the way. Mm-hmm. These are people who really walk their talk of never give up. Non-victims, you know, and I can't speak from that kind of experience, but I've been deeply immersed in mentoring in my humble way with these type of people. And they give you techniques and teachings and just attitudinal saturation by being in their presence, which is cool. I'll close with this. I met one young woman back in 1989 or 1990 in the jungles of northern Burma. She was a student, and they had all taken up nonviolent activism against the dictator in 1988. And people may remember the famous 8888 massacres in Burma, August 8, 1988, when the dictator Ne Win, who was the dictator that let me enter the country ordained as a monk, by the way. Mm-hmm. And the students took to the street, nearly a million people, led by the students. And the soldiers had orders to shoot, and they killed between 3,000 to 10,000 people, people said, who were on the ground then during that week in August. Anyway, this woman and her colleagues and friends fled to the jungles, and I was out there for several months with them to do what I could to bring the voiceless to the world. These were my family, my Dhamma sisters and brothers. We were sitting around a campfire way deep in the jungle, And I asked her, "Hey, have you ever been in love?" And she looked at me and she said, "I have been. I'm still in love. My fiance and I were to be married, but I haven't seen him in nearly a year. We were separated during a firefight." Okay. She said, "Even though I don't know his well-being, and I know many people have been killed and harmed and tortured, if my life is in service of freedom, I will die in love." I met her later after 15 years, where she was granted asylum in Australia. And I went to her house. She had cancer, and she remembered me, and I remembered her. We remembered that occasion. And she looked at me and said, "Alan, I'm going to die in love. My life has been in service of freedom." And the next day she died. Next day. And these are the kind of stories of the Viktor Frankls, right? No one can control your mind except you. More so than ever today with the pandemic, the way in which global totalitarianism and digital fascism and the rise of dictatorship all through our computer screens, and with Siri and Allegra and all kinds of ways in which we're being co-opted to behave in ways against our own fidelity, our own conscience, our own dignity. We don't even know anymore who's artificial and who isn't.
Mm.
So sovereignty and independence and freedom of speech and freedom of mind and freedom of expression are more than just virtues and inalienable rights. We need to protect them at all costs. Never give up. When you talk about not being a victim, do not participate in the lie, as it's been said. And the lie of collusion, the lie of denial, and the trauma of denial, we don't want to look back and go, "Oh my God." Fair enough that we make mistakes, but let's learn from them right now. Right now, we need all hands on board. And when you're a victim, you're often in healing mode. Yep, there's time for healing, but guess what? Bring that broken arm to the front line. You got a cast, it's even harder than your fist. Use it. I mean, I think all hands on right now, because you are a broken whole angel. It's our sacred duty to use every element of our conscience, our dignity, our voice. We have to become revolution in action, in a humble, broken, beautiful way. We are the masses, not the minority. They are not sheeple. We are freedom fighters. Everyone can be ignited. We are fireflies in the dark. Let us light up the sky with the radiance of freedom that includes even you, Mr. Biden, you, Mr. Klaus Schwab, you, Mr. Macron, you, Mr. Xi Jinping, you, Mr. Putin, all the people that we demonize and vilify. Reconciliation, Dhamma, is the beauty of non-victimhood. It's non-blame. Blaming backwards, blaming forwards. Take the enemy out of the mind. That was what I learned in Burma with Aung San Suu Kyi and my teachers. Stop demonizing consciousness by projecting it onto people. You're not a victim. You're a beautiful flower, and it's been a lightning bolt nearby. It's showing you the radiance of the light. What is your water? What is your light? What is your air? What are the minerals? What are the colors on your palette? Vitalize, nutrition-based Dhamma presence. Open like a flower and let the fragrance of your own unique radiance unconditionally release from your being. What's your contribution? Look at the work that you're doing. Look at the work that people are doing. That should be so applauded. Teachers today should be those in refugee camps, girls who've been trafficked around the world. Let them come out. The new Dalai Lama should be a refugee. He is a refugee. Bring in boys, bring in girls, bring in defective soldiers from Burma. Let us hear the voice of the voiceless and how we can learn. Prisoners of conscience have a lot to teach us on never giving up.
Mm. Yeah.
Julian Assange,
Mm.
cannot say enough about the heroism of this man's incredible truth telling journalism to illuminate the criminality and the cover up of governmental lies called war crimes.
Mm.
Core deception. Let us not participate anywhere that we can see collusion, and the trauma of that collusion is huge.
Mm.
Sorry to go on about this, but I think there's so much power being lost
Mm.
by systemically looking back at things that we think were the source of our so-called inability, when in fact it hurt like fucking hell.
Yeah. Yeah. And I see we do
There's,
distract ourselves from really feeling. What does it feel like? What does this feel like to see what's happening?
and
Mm.
and what can I do for what I see towards myself and perhaps the person nearest to you in your life, and maybe broaden that circle of empathy and caring and generosity
Mm.
to the best of your ability.
Yeah.
I've had people give me their last morsel of food in refugee camps. I've had people throw their body over me under rocket attack over me.
Mm.
I've never, ever had an experience like that in the West.
Mm.
And it went, whoa, what? Whoa, okay, cool. Cool. That's really rad. That's really cool. I can learn to extend even through my broken